we ended up concluding that we needed a certification system that would help protect and implement a comprehensive ethical standard. But I think I would take it back a step or two before I elaborate on that.
Okay.
Because when we initially set up the working party on biofuels, we thought that we were going to end up discussing the new approaches to biofuel development arising from scientific developments in synthetic biology, for example, plant breeding, genetic modification, that there were new approaches coming through from the science that would enable biofuel development to take place without having the negative aspects that the first generation biofuels had, the negative ethical implications. And
like increasing yields.
Yeah, increasing yields, and also enabling biofuels to be developed, say, by algae in tanks rather than using land, things like that.
Right.
And the more we looked into this, the more we realized two things. One, a lot of these new technologies are quite a long way from actually being applied in the field, and certainly applied at the kind of scale that would actually make a difference. And also that we are going to be, the original approaches to biofuel development are going to be with us for quite a long time, while that transition takes place perhaps to the second generation biofuels. So we couldn't just say, let's discuss how we can have a break with the past and move to the next generation biofuels. We had to keep both in mind as we made our analyses and as we discussed how you could make both the current generation able to be developed without being at the expense of people's essential rights and so on. And well, part of that aspect as well, the developing people's essential rights, access to sufficient food and water, etc. There's an aspect of biofuel development, particularly in developing countries, which allows local communities to develop biofuels for their own local use from their own local resources, and to have a fuel where they wouldn't otherwise have had access to fuel, and therefore to have more efficient agricultural production because they can have a tractor, for example. And so there are very local implications of biofuel development, which are actually beneficial to people who don't have enough food, and it enables them to produce more food. So again, part of our balancing judgment was we want to make sure that people are not exploited in the development of biofuels, but at the same time we want to make sure that we don't actually cut off their capacity to develop biofuels for their own use in a way that's beneficial for them, and it doesn't necessarily damage the environment.
So this concept of biofuels as a tool for rural development of science and other mechanisms across the board, improving both agricultural technology for biofuels as well as food.
Yes. But there is no doubt there are places in the world where people's human rights are being violated, and it is not always ethical when you look at the current ways of developing biofuels for Europe and the United States.
And this is more along the lines of large concerns coming into developing countries and buying up land, the issue with land rights.
That's right.
And also labor and employment issues.
That's right, yes. And you know, in many cases, having a job is a good thing for somebody in those countries, but it mustn't be exploitative. And it must be fair wages and so on. And again, not to such an extent that food production is jeopardized and there are local shortages of food because biofuels are being developed. And it's that there are issues with companies buying land in the developing world to grow the biofuels, but there are also issues even where the biofuels are merely imported into, for example, Europe. You know, Europe imports biofuels, and it shouldn't end up in a position where it's exporting all the negative downside of biofuel development to other countries, and at the same time getting the credits for its own minimization of greenhouse gas output and so on.
And so one way to do that, Professor Tait, that the Council considered was through certification by using standards.
Yes. And we felt that there could very usefully be a common, comprehensive ethical standard that would apply to all fuels, all biofuels developed in and imported into the EU. We specifically focused first on the EU, but again, we felt that that could be equally applicable to the USA, although we didn't quite have the same leverage there.
So we're really talking here about perhaps like we drink our coffee, from fair trade grown coffee beans. Are we talking about filling our tanks up with something that could be fair trade certified fuel?
Yes, something like that. I think a common certification system that would reassure companies that are developing the biofuels and also reassure the people who are buying the fuel at the end of the day that this is produced to an ethical standard. And this kind of thing is sometimes seen as naively optimistic. But if you look at the history of international regulation and controls of pollution and of unethical behavior and so on, it's a long history of one country or one organization starting out to set something up in a way that can be demonstrated to work, and then other people will gradually join in. So there are plenty of people of goodwill out there who would like to be able to do something and want to see how it could be done, and if we can demonstrate how it can be done, then other people will join in, and you'll see a kind of bandwagon effect, I think.
And you see the Council delving into in a follow-up report, for example, on studying the different standards that are quickly emerging worldwide, like referred to in the report Roundtable for Sustainable Biofuels, or in the United States we have the Council for Sustainable Biomass Production.
Yeah.
Is that something that academics and other stakeholders perhaps need to take a closer look at?
Yes, I think so. I think that the Roundtable for Sustainable Biofuels is certainly something that we thought was, as far as we were aware, the best example out there of something that could be made to work. And I think we felt it needed one or two ways of strengthening it, for example. But generally speaking, it was along the right lines.
Yeah, and indeed, I think perhaps soon the Renewable Energy Directive in Europe will use that as one of its benchmark certification systems to certify biofuels.
Yes, that's right. And actually, at the request of the policymakers, we're already having meetings with the UK and European policymakers who are going to be working in this area. So they have come to the Nuffield Council. They're setting up meetings with us to discuss what they can do and how they can do it, which is really unusual in response to a report like this.
Yeah. So the report didn't just go on the shelf. It really was critical in moving policy considerations forward.
Yeah.
And
I think another thing that would be good would be if academic researchers who are thinking about doing research on the ethics of biofuels would use the standard, use our proposals for the standard, and see to what extent it could be implemented and how it could be implemented in a whole range of particular circumstances. So Nuffield Council, of course, is not a grant-giving body in that sense, but people who are applying to various research organizations for money to do research, I think could usefully pick up on this and actually use it as part of a wider proposal.
Yeah, as part of a framework.
As part of a framework. So how could this be implemented within this framework? Could it be made to work, and how could it be made to work? And we're hoping that it will lead to other research in other areas.
Well, and really, Dr. Tait, not only just for biofuels, but I think in the report the Council alludes to then, if indeed biofuels can satisfy these 5 different principles, the environmental or social principles, then we really have an ethical obligation moving forward to then consider biofuels within a wide range of energy sources and then compare them together. Yes. Because this isn't only a question unique to biofuels.
No, that's right. And it would be inequitable in the long run just to say this very strict ethical standard applies to biofuels, but as far as agriculture is concerned, they can carry on doing similar things without any sanction, So I think, when you think it through logically, our report was constrained by the terms of reference to focus on biofuels. But agriculture as a whole could benefit from this kind of thinking, I think.
Well, and perhaps even other feedstocks, such as coal or
and other energy feedstocks.
Petroleum, or even other renewables like wind or solar.
Indeed, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And also, an important part of that is if it can be done within the ethical requirements, then there is a duty to develop the biofuel. So the thinking behind that is that we are going to need biofuels as part of a general mix in order to enable us to deal with climate change and its mitigation. And so if you can do it, if you can do it economically, and if you can do it ethically, then you have a duty to do it. And part of that is also imposing on governments the requirement actually to fund the research that will enable you to do it more ethically as well. And so the technical research, scientific and technical research.
Both you and I, coming from the academic, area, we see the need for that additional research money because these are questions that are broad-ranging but very important questions to be answered.
That's right.
Not just for biofuels, but for all of our energy resources.
That's right. And there are quite a few commercial initiatives, funded by companies going into next-generation biofuels. But I think it's good if there is also publicly funded research in those areas because then that has the kind of impartiality that goes with publicly funded research, and it also sometimes has a greater longevity in that the commercial organisations can sometimes quite suddenly have a different policy for doing something else and just drop an area that they've been funding.
And they're very specific in their focus as well. They may focus on one type of feedstock but not maybe others.
So we shouldn't be relying just on the companies, even though the companies are doing a lot and they're doing some good research and they've got some good initiatives. But it shouldn't be entirely relying on the multinational companies to do this because there's a need for continuity of perspective and research that has a different policy agenda sometimes.
Well, Dr. Tait, I think that you today in our podcast, as well as the Nuffield Council, should be commended for bringing these issues to light at a broader scale, at an international scale, and on behalf of GCB Bioenergy, we'd really like to thank you again for joining us in this podcast on the Nuffield Council's report. It really provides all of us, whether we work in policy advocacy or in scientific research, a valuable lens through which to consider all of the ethical aspects of encouraging increased biofuels consumption. With that, I think we've reached the end of our time, but I want to encourage our listeners to join us for our next podcasts, where we'll continue to explore exciting new findings on bioenergy through interviews with the world's leading scientific and policy experts, such as Professor Tait. You can learn more about our podcasts again at www.gcbbioenergy.org. And thank you again, Dr. Tait.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity.